like to call the committee of the whole meeting for Tuesday, November 12th to order. Please call the roll.
Alderman Stralchuk is excused. Alderman Talaco. Alderman Meyer. Alderman Hancher.
Here.
Alderman Bach.
Here.
Alderman Parrish.
Here.
Alderman Bratt.
Here.
Alderman Gebhardt.
Here.
And Mayor Nurbin.
Here. First up, we have approval of the minutes from October 8th.
Move to approve. Second.
Motion and a second. Any comments, corrections? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those are approved. Next up, discussion, Port Washington Road market analysis by Redevelopment Resources of Madison, Wisconsin. So we've got a presentation here summarizing the report that hopefully you've all read. And take it away. Uncomfortably close, unfortunately.
Okay.
If the green light's on, it should be active, but you might need to cozy up to it.
All right, how's that? Is that
A little
working
better.
okay?
Even I'll try to turn the gain up here a little bit.
All right.
There
Good
you
evening.
Perfect.
It's Kristen Fish Peterson with Redevelopment Resources again, and I'm here tonight with Dana Sarver. She is we affectionately call her our data geek. So if we have any questions specifically about the data, she's our expert. I probably could put this in presentation mode. And we will go through the slides, but if you have questions about the report at all, stop us along the way, or we can take questions at the end. I'm going to pick up where I left off. We presented phase 1 and phase 2 already. I believe phase 1 was in May and phase 2 is in July, and here we are with building upon the first 2 phases with recommendations. These recommendations include those in the categories of zoning, programmatic tactics, organizational structure, and then high priority redevelopment sites. So according to your comprehensive plan, goals for Port Washington Road, we did include these in the report, and we've read these and really did focus on these goals that you've set already for Port Washington Road. But to promote the redevelopment of lands, to encourage land uses and densities that will promote efficient development, providing adequate infrastructure, promoting the expansion or stabilization of the base, the economic base, preserving and enhancing Mequon's rural and small town character, retaining and fostering the health and the vitality of commercial areas, ensuring well-designed, visually attractive developments while preserving the existing small town character, developing and retaining a diverse tax base, and developing a proactive economic development strategic plan. We did take a deep dive into the zoning codes themselves, but we also wanted to reiterate this, the number of properties in each zoning code that exist in the study area. So primarily you have B2 being used heavily and B3, and then kind of a tie with B1 and B2 PUD, but primarily B2 and 3 were the predominant categories along the corridor. When we looked at all the zoning classifications, realized that the only major difference between the B categories was their primary permitted uses. So B1 is a neighborhood business district, B2 is retail, B3 is office, B4 is business park, but just about everything else within those zoning classifications was very similar. The open space requirements, the density, the setbacks, all of that stuff. So one of the recommendations that we came up with was to create a new zoning classification, and you can call it whatever you want. We just decided to name it commercial corridor. You don't have a zoning code named CC yet, so commercial corridor, and then you would retain all the existing permitted uses in the B zones. They could continue to be permitted, and all conditional uses could continue to be conditional. But I would recommend adding fast food because you have a couple of small outlots that could be developed with fast food opportunities. and then adding fitness centers, indoor recreation, amusement, and entertainment venues as permitted uses. And then we made recommendations to change things like the minimum lot size, the building height, and the maximum building size and open space ratio, just to encourage density and make the most use of the land that's there. We then really looked at your organizational structure for redevelopment, and we're recommending creating a redevelopment authority. This is a separate body politic created by the city, by you all, and there are special powers that have been outlined in the report that are in state statutes. You would then want to appoint, the mayor would have the opportunity to appoint professionals that are appropriate in the fields of, for example, realtors, bankers, attorneys, other related professionals. And then you would want to really empower the RDA to lead the redevelopment efforts for the city. And this does a number of things to the benefit of the community. I've helped create redevelopment authorities, and I've also educated redevelopment authorities on their powers and how to be effective in communities. I've spent a lot of time in different communities doing this work. In Watertown, for example, we did create a redevelopment authority. We had one attorney, 2 bankers, a realtor, and a pastor. And that pastor served a very vital role, but so did the other professionals that were involved. And then they were tasked with buying the blighted property, which if the city is going to be buying property, it can be very political. It can be very contentious. There can be a lot of chatter on Facebook, and it's kind of nice to have that committee over there doing that work. They're taking the flack, you're not. Also, if the RDA ever has to borrow money, their borrowing would not count against the city's borrowing capacity. So there's some financial advantages to using a redevelopment authority, as well as some political advantages. Redevelopment authorities have the opportunity or the ability to use eminent domain if necessary. It's not something that anyone ever, a community ever wants to do, but when Watertown was acquiring these 6 properties on Main Street to redevelop the entire block, we got down to the very last property, and they hired an eminent domain attorney, and we never did go to eminent domain, but it was a conversation. We had to hire an attorney as well, and we got through it all. But it was that by that time, after the RDA had acquired 5 properties, it was necessary to get that 6th property. So, yes.
Hey, welcome back. It's good to have you. It was a great report. This is one of the recommendations of the report that I paused on. I'm trying to understand how important of a recommendation this is to you. I do feel we are a small community, relatively speaking, and we see these third-party agencies created more in larger, more urban areas where we're looking for fast change, and maybe where the politicians aren't comfortable and need a scapegoat for sound decision-making. But I think we've had very good long-term planning, and the thought of outsourcing or partnering with, or like making our economic development board a redevelopment authority. I mean, I've been in a lot of those meetings, and I just think we have a strategic plan here, and I think we're implementing it, and I'm concerned about this particular recommendation, and maybe even the aggressiveness of acquiring properties along the corridor. You know, there's been, certainly that's the easiest thing to do, is just buy the ones you don't want developed for undesirable uses and wait till we get our hotel, for example. But that's a really aggressive redevelopment approach that I'm going to be listening to your presentation and just try to understand, you know, like, how aggressive do we want to be, and does our community even want this pace, you know? And so thank you again for being here, and I'm just going to be listening. And I guess, how important is this to the crux of your overall recommendations?
Sure, I guess I don't have a lot of the history as to how the city has operated in the past with acquiring property and doing large-scale redevelopment, so I'm not sure how effective the city council, or how courageous or determined you've been as a body. And I guess it does come down to your desire to do that. I mean, I think from an organizational structure perspective, it's a tool. The redevelopment authority would be a tool that you could use. It also would open up different types of opportunities for funding. Maybe if the RDA was pursuing something, the RDA could also own property. It could also borrow money and sell property. It could serve as your land bank. There are just, this work can be very intense. And so when you have an agenda that is dealing with issues from fire department contracts, negotiating with unions, to, dealing with approvals from the planning and zoning committee, and it's another layer of work that can be done by a different body. So I guess it's up to you. It's all your appetite for. But I would recommend that if you were going to start a redevelopment authority, you would want it to be autonomous, and you would want to give it the control that it needed to do its job, and the power that it needed to do its job. If you're not ready to do that, that's a decision that you can make as a group. And I think it's a great tool to lead redevelopment efforts, because it can be in the weeds on things that, this stuff takes a long time. It's a big process.
Yeah, I'll just add that it's definitely a different way of thinking about things, but we're not here to commit to doing it or not. We're just receiving the report, and it's up to us to decide what to do with it. So I wouldn't recommend taking it out. It may not be our favorite tool to exercise, but we haven't even had a conversation about that. We're just receiving the report. So
Well, the other thing, we like to say to try these ideas on like a shirt, see how they feel.
Yep.
There might be 6 months down the road where you say, you know what, maybe a redevelopment authority would be an effective tool to get this work done. But you might have to think about it for a while and really just think through the process of how this could operate. So, and the final comment on this slide talks about fund them initially with TIF increment. So you wouldn't close a district or, open a new one or anything like that. The city could still control the TIF districts. However, you could allocate money from the TID to fund the activities of the RDA. In Watertown, how that worked is we had the downtown TIF district number 5, took a $5 million donation from the TID district number 3, which was the Walmart district, which was flush with cash and not a lot happening out in that district anymore. So they donated a bunch of money to the downtown TID, and that's what we used to buy those properties and get that work done. And it was an allocation from the city council to the RDA to spend that money on that project. We then went into some programmatic recommendations, including promoting the growth of the medical office cluster. You have a few clusters on Port Washington Road, but this one we thought was worthy of really spending more time and effort on than any other cluster. You have a density of medical office buildings. Those businesses bring visitors from out of town. They also serve your residents very well. When those people come to town to see their doctor or doctors, they also have lunch. They also might go shopping. They spend other money. So we think, and this was one of the classifications of development that had a higher average per square foot of value. So you have high value property, nice buildings. This use was one we recommended focusing on. As far as your TIF policy is concerned, we want to encourage you to use TID 4 and 5 to facilitate redevelopment for those properties for acquisition and site clearance. But you have a policy, and the policy is clear on how much investment the city would spend on any one project. And I have often advised communities to understand that every project is unique. Every project is going to have its own challenges and different circumstances. And if you can be consistent enough to apply a policy across the board, that's great. But oftentimes there might be a need to do something creative or different outside of the policy. So we wanted to plant the seed that it's okay to get creative with your TIF policy, or use your TIF in such a way that just understanding every deal is unique. And sometimes you have to prime the pump with a big transformative project that will then spur other private sector investment. In many communities, that first project that's transformative really does set the stage. And the city might have to invest more heavily in that project, but then every project thereafter, the city's investment is less and less and less because the private sector sees the value and wants to be there. Yes.
Thank you. Our current TIF policy is, it's a formulaic approach.
Yeah.
Whereas you're kind of alluding to, and I've agreed in the past, where you kind of do site-specific TIFs or, a negotiated approach. Are you suggesting kind of veering away from the TIF formula, where you plug in the development and then you qualify for this amount?
I
It
would
sounds
do
like
that
you're
when it
suggesting
works.
a different type of TIF tool where you negotiate it and try to achieve a greater cause for a specific site or area.
So one of my biggest pet peeves in development is when a developer comes to town and says, "This is what we want to do. What can the city do for us?" And that's not how it should work. It should say, "Show us your pro forma and let's see what you need." And I'm sure you do that. I'm sure Jack and Kim analyze the pro formas and look for the gaps and see, how your TIF funds can fill the gap. Sometimes on these projects, though, let's say they qualify for a certain incentive, but they still have a gap where it comes to demolition or even acquisition or something, because these redevelopment projects are just so expensive. So there might be the opportunity to be a little bit more flexible and say, we're going to seed this project with acquiring the property and demoing everything on it and making it a clean slate and then looking at an incentive. So I guess I just was encouraging you to keep open mind, and if you find a project that you really want and your formula doesn't fill the gap, there are still opportunities to fill that gap.
Yeah. Our current TIF policy in 4 and 5 allows for things outside of the formula. It's just the formula is there to make it easy to understand for people coming in.
A prior mayor fought very hard for that formula and nothing else, so that's why.
Well,
I
yeah,
bring it up.
the formula is there so it's easy to understand, but we've often told people if that doesn't work, propose something. It's just
Okay, good.
we've had 5 people maybe take advantage of the TIF in the last 10 years, so there hasn't been a lot of swings at that piñata. Hopefully that'll change.
We also have looked at the corridor from the perspective of, do people know what's on either end of it and what would be there? So some wayfinding signage would be recommended to direct people to other attractions or things that are down the corridor that they might not be aware of. And then really focus on marketing the corridor to attract visitors and to keep residents up to date on the development efforts. I think there are quite a few ideas in the report about ways you can market what's going on there to visitors as well as residents, just as things happen. And finally, we have a list of transformative recommendations on specific sites. Large-scale developments could include a hotel or more than one hotel, some senior living developments, some mixed-use developments, and some indoor entertainment venues. We identified several sites in the report, and I have slides for each one. If you want a high level for each property, we can go through those. If you'd like us to do that, we can.
They were in the report. I read them. Ready to react to those people.
Or we can take questions.
Questions, yeah. Questions are always appropriate. Alderman Bach.
My district is on the north part of this corridor is on the east, is in the 5th district. The east side of Port Washington is there, and then Alderman Parish is on the other side on the north. So my comments are kind of the 5th district, but I'm just had like 3 or 4 points that jumped out to me that I just wanted to kind of share. First of all, I really kind of like that Mequon Medical Center of Excellence idea. I mean, I think there's some interesting things that we can talk about there. I think we have all the ingredients there already. It just needs to be pulled together. There's so many different providers that are there right now. You've got Ascension, you've got Children's, you've got Freighter. And people are using, all these different services rather than looking at them as competition, looking at them as how can we cooperate?
Right.
Because you might be seeing a physician at Ascension, and then you might have something wacky, and then you might need to go to Freighter, for example. And instead of going all the way to the Wauwatosa campus, it's very nice to have that here in Mequon so you can pull all that together. And there's some missing things too. You know, you can identify some of those missing kind of healthcare issues. You know, for example, I had a neighbor, an elderly neighbor who was at Ascension recently, and he needed, had an infection and needed antibiotics. Well, he needed like 30 days to be in the hospital. Well, the hospital's not going to keep you there for 30 days. So then you've got to look for nursing care to give him those antibiotics, and there's nowhere in Mequon that was available, so he had to go down to the east side of Milwaukee to East Castle. So those kinds of things, whether it's rehab, whether it's extended nurse care for things like that, I mean, there's really an opportunity to kind of tie all of that together. So I like that idea, and then marketing that as kind of a North Shore Mequon hub of medical care. I mean, we have an opportunity there, I think. So that jumped out at me. I kind of liked the idea of the parking lots at the theater and the Metro Market. I know we see that a lot, but using that space, I'm not crazy about fast food restaurants over there. I think we have enough fast food restaurants. I'm more on kind of the healthy food, so maybe healthy fast food, but we've got so many already, so that fast food kind of scares me a little bit. But there are some opportunities there, I think. I mean, the Cooper's Hawk, that's probably too small for that kind of a thing, but that might be interested, something like that. We've talked a lot about the hotel. I mean, I was in favor of a kind of a nice boutique hotel somewhere, and I think you kind of talked a little bit about that in your report as well. I'm kind of not interested in the water park idea. I think people will go other places for water parks. I think the family kind of entertainment center is interesting, but I see that separate from the hotel, kind of a separate, but the hotel coming up with a nice hotel. Those two locations I thought that you identified were, kind of in the right ballpark. And I like the idea of, the motel on corner of Donjas Bay, I think, where the one turning that in, because that's closer to residential and
Right.
making that more apartments, condos, coffee shop, something like that, and moving the hotel, and again, a nice boutique hotel closer to the freeway in one of those two places that you identified. I thought that was the two interesting locations. My last comment, I'm just going to say, because it just always bothers me. I think I mentioned it last time too. Is about banks, and you're in the report that you mentioned something about when you have a building, that is vacant, that it sits for a while, and because people don't want to come in, they've got to demolish it, they've got to and so you got to be careful. I think with some that we have. There was one. I think we have one old bank that's sitting there in Mequon right now. I think we just approved a new bank, and I just, I just want to be careful with banks. We have a lot of banks that have corporate branding, So I don't know how many banks we have, but there's some banks that are corporate branding. And again, I mean, I literally have been into a brick and mortar bank maybe twice in a year, and maybe for to get a notary or something like that. And so the caution is, you've got all of these banks, and I completely understand you can't regulate whether or not a bank is going to go there. They have to do the market analysis, and if they fit the zoning, you could put a bank there. But from a development standpoint, and from a planning standpoint, and from an architectural standpoint, I just read in the Business Journal that I think it was Associated Bank is combining branches and closing branches. What's going to happen in 10 years with banks? And if you have some of this kind of unique bank branded architecture, and that corporation decides to merge banks and close that, you've got this building there, and who's going to move into that? So that's just a caution. And I think you just have to be really, really careful. Not against banks. I'm just saying that whole banking world is probably going to change. Yeah, you could put a coffee shop in there, but that's not going to change the bank. The U.S. Bank there on the corner of Port Washington and Mequon Road, nothing has happened at that bank in 25 years as far as development. The parking lot hasn't even been changed. And you go in there, and there's not very many people in there anymore. Does U.S. Bank know that, hey, some point we're going to consolidate, and that bank is going to be closed, and you're going to have a space there? So just a caution, I think, and you kind of hinted at that in the report, but those are some of my thoughts.
The banks are interesting because they want to be here. They know you have people that will invest their money, spend their money, deposit it with them. So you're a rich market for banks, obviously, but they also are some of the highest property value per acre and per square foot. So that right now they're good, but I understand, we're not recommending encouraging more banks. However, in economic development, we go through these cycles where right now, we have done research on what's the best use for a shopco, because once all the shopcos went out, everybody was trying to redevelop their shopcos, and I'm sure that that trend is going to come with banks too, because banks are going to be looking for smaller footprints and their properties are going to need to be redeveloped. So we'll look at that type of property. Will it be office? Will it be demolished? Depending on the age of it and its obsolescence from an architectural standpoint, all of that stuff will be looked at, and I'm sure there will be a lot of cool case studies on how to repurpose banks.
Alderman Parrish.
Just to follow up on Alderman Bach's comment about banks, there was another one approved at last month's planning commission. There was a few of us that voted no, mostly because there's a saying that they say that their current styles are modern, but anyone saying that it's not modern the next day.
Right.
Yep. So they're not timeless. And poor planning staff had to listen to me and a couple others vent about the banks at the last month, and you can't pick winners and losers, as we've always said. We can't stop banks. It's exactly your recommendation. It's about density of the site and not allowing these little half-acre sites where they put up these ugly little boxes. It's about efficient assemblage of multiple sites and putting up something valuable that benefits the community, which will include a bank. So what? But if it's one little building gobbling up a rare land, it's very scarce, as you found in this corridor. So I like your approach on density. And I think this will be my final time talking, but my final point would be just to counter what you were saying, Alderman Bach, about the recommendation for where the chalet is at the corner of Donjas Bay and Port. I get that it's easy pickings, especially because for some reason the TIF overlay, and I think you saw this, the TIF covers like 4 or 5 of the houses behind the chalet. And so it's easy to look at and say, okay, well, the chalet is a little older, the houses are what they are. Let's assemble it all and do some greater development there. But this is my district, and it would significantly change the character of the neighborhood. Imagine being a house in that neighborhood, and all of a sudden, half the houses disappear, and you have a big conglomerated development that comes in there. So that's one that I'd like to vet out further. And yeah, I'm really hesitant to touch those houses, even though I get that it's tempting being in the TIF. But we should preserve residential neighborhoods too. Thank you.
Any other feedback or comments on the report? Alderman Meyer.
Thank you for the report. Appreciated that. And I like the fact of one of the things I wanted to bring up was the business incubator that you had talked about. I think that's something that's very interesting to do. Don't know exactly how one of those gets started and stuff like that, but I think that's very interesting to have that one of those here. We're developing one of those areas for it, so that those businesses that would start out of that might stay here for it with opportunities in that for it, since they would be starting to be established inside of the city. So I think that's something that thank you for having that, and then I think that's something we should look into to do that. And the subject of banks, unfortunately, it's a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, the demographics here lend for having the banks here because we skew older. The residents here, they're more accustomed to going into banks than younger are. And so I think that's one of the things, and plus the factor that the income levels here are high, I think that's one of the major reasons we see so many banks are here and moving into this area over here for it. Hotel, I love the idea of having one here in the right area for it. I think that you marking that as a priority for us, I think that's one thing we should have in that. And I'm not really a favor of having a development authority for that. I think that if we did something like that, it'd be way in the future. And I'm a person that kind of, instead of saying like deflecting that off of us, I think that's one of our jobs or one of our economic development board and stuff like that to do. And it's our and it's our job to take the flak if something goes wrong. So I wouldn't want to push it off to somebody else and do that. But I appreciate all your info that you sent us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't worry, they'd still blame us anyway. Alderman Bratt.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. Very, very informative and thorough. Do have a couple questions. I do like the idea of a commercial corridor district. I do wonder, you know, when you get the debate, what's modern to me might look archaic to someone else. Would there be a benefit doing design standards for a commercial corridor? Normally I drive this corridor, but I decided to walk it the other day because I needed steps. And whether we like it or not, there is a significant amount of pedestrian traffic with housing up and down this whole corridor. I wonder if we focus on some of the design standards as part of any commercial corridor overlay. So like as new sidewalks need to be replaced, we make them wider, you know, make crossings when it's appropriate, when we're redeveloping sites that we think about, you know, what can we do to improve it for pedestrian? Because I do like the idea of more density if it's done right. You know, 3-story does make sense if it's you know, and done in a way that fits with the rest of the district. I think that could be very commendable. I'm a big fan of having no parking minimums. You know, let the market decide that. I think a lot of these buildings, like fast foods, they probably will want a lot of parking, but some other sites, they might not need as many. So I'd rather, there's plenty of parking there now. So I think, you know, if a commercial corridor, if we get rid of parking minimum, that's a way we could promote more dense development. With the redevelopment authority, I'm a little leery. I'm pretty confident in our planning team. They've done some other things, but I'd be curious to ask for their feedback long term, like how a redevelopment authority could help, or would it mesh with what we need here? Would it be a good tool for them? So yeah, that's my thought. My kids love the idea of a trampoline park. I'm a little less excited, but thank you.
So do the orthopedic surgeons up the road.
Right? Yeah, yeah. We weren't paid to say that.
It's good business for them, yeah. It's good exercise, though. Alderman Gebhardt.
Good evening. Just a comment, kind of taking us back to where we started on this project, and you started with the list of goals that we set out and developed as an economic development board, and with Kim and Jack. And I got to tell you, as I had expectations as we started this process, and I was part of the selection process to begin with, I have to say that it's exceeded my expectations as far as the overall report that we got. You've given us a lot of good insight on the market. You've given us some really good comparable data that we can play with. I think what you're seeing here tonight is that we're going to have a lot of future discussions and debates based upon the information that you've presented. So I think that's a really good outcome, meaning that you've given us some things to think about. Maybe a few of the ideas are a little bit outside of the box, or maybe what we're comfortable with in Mequon, but at least it's going to provide some discussion, because I think what we all share as a common goal is that this is an area that's ripe with potential, and how do we maximize that potential? So it's something that we need to figure out, and I think that this report that you put together is a really good baseline to help us do that. And I like the way you've isolated a couple of different areas and talked about how we might be able to cluster it, or areas that might be more appropriate for redevelopment than others. And the other piece that stuck out to me that I was not expecting is that, you know, I always thought that this area had a lot of vacancy in terms of office buildings and some of the other industries. But it was really interesting to see the data that compared to some of our peers, this corridor is actually tracking at or better than many of the benchmarks that we would compare ourselves against. So that's a really good, positive foundation to build from. Now we as a group need to figure out what to do with this and how to go ahead and move it forward. So just want to thank you, and I think it was a really quality product.
Thank you. I did have one more slide that I wanted to share at the very end. So added up all of the potential tax base increase and I went conservative on the values, but you have a potential to increase your tax base by a lot and realize the benefit of a lot of direct, indirect, and induced impact of construction over the next 5 to 10 years or however long. This could take 20 years to do these redevelopment projects, but just remember that these projects take a significant amount of time, money, and political capital. That's what we like to say. So
Certainly. That's good news. Good to hear. And some of the recommendations were uncomfortable for some. I think that's okay. It forces you to go beyond what your preconceived notion of the right answer is, and that's okay. That's kind of what we paid for a report for, because otherwise we'll just think about things the same way and wonder why they don't work. So there's some in here that are easier for folks to grasp onto, and some that are maybe more of an uphill battle. But I think that's good, because the report's not going to go away. It'll still be valid for quite some time, and if things don't work, you can always try something a little different that's in the report that you didn't implement yet at a future date. So it'll remain a useful tool for us for quite a while. So I certainly appreciate the report and the recommendations therein. Are there any other questions for anyone?
Just that, Alderman Meyer and Alderman Parrish and I met at the public welfare, and we talked a little bit about, from this report, we might be able to pull out some interesting survey questions to add to the survey, to get the public's feedback on some of this. So I think there's some good nuggets in here to kind of pull out and write some questions.
I agree. The timing's good in that regard. Alderman Parrish.
Just while we have you, I know we're wrapping up, but the survey mentions like a 4-star hotel, and then I think with meeting space and without meeting space, what is your actual recommendation? Like, what is our market need, and how do we attract a quality hotel, the reputable brand, and not, the others? So, thank you.
I think we did the amount of work we could do without doing a full hotel feasibility study. Comparing, you have business travelers, you have, they may not be staying here, they might be staying in Grafton or somewhere else. You have people that might need to come for overnight medical stays. They might not want to stay at the Baymont or the Chalet. So looking at the quality of those products and what you could have here, I think you would need to do a complete hotel feasibility study to get, and I did talk to an appraiser, and she agreed about a hotel, but we both agreed that a separate feasibility study would need to be done.
Definitely do that before the developer comes and asks you how much money can they have.
So you recommend the municipality do the study, not wait for the developer?
Well, if you have a site with a developer that wants to do it, they'll do it. But if you have a site you really want to market as a specific hotel site and you want that use to be there and you want to lead the process on that, then you could do it. We've done it both ways. We don't do hotel feasibility studies, so I'm not making that pitch for us. But we've seen where the municipality really wants to attract a hotel, so they'll pay for that. Seen it in smaller communities primarily. Otherwise, for example, the office development on the northern side of that we recommended a hotel on that one. That developer is very interested in redeveloping that property and was looking for ideas, and I'm sure they would conduct their feasibility study.
Interesting. All right. Any other comments before we wrap this up and move on to council? Administrator Jones.
As we wrap up, just a note to the members of the committee gathered here, if you have any comments that you scribbled into the draft report as you were reviewing it over the past weekend, feel free to forward those on to staff, specifically Director Tollefson. I know I jotted down some notes as I was reading through this weekend, and our plan is to get those to Kristen and her team so that those can be incorporated into the final report that we will then take to the Economic Development Board at their next meeting, likely not next week, but into 2025. And that will then serve as the basis, as we've discussed here this evening, for potential future discussions, likely at a similar meeting as a committee of the whole here that we're having tonight. So if you have any comments, get them over to Kim. Thank you.
Excellent. Any parting words or let's see, where are we on the agenda? Oh, we'll go have a chance for going once and twice on comments here, and then we'll move on to the planning calendar. Seeing and hearing no one. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I look forward to figuring out what to do with the report now. That's a lot of good suggestions. We'll have to work our way through it. Moving on, we have our planning calendar for the committee of the whole. If anyone has any items they'd like to see on the agenda, we can suggest them now or suggest them offline at a later date and get them on the calendar for 2025. Any questions or comments, or we'll hear from you electronically in the coming weeks. All right, moving on, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
I
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now adjourned and we'll